Hi everyone, I just wanted to do a little screencast for our Chapter 5 studies to kind of help us move it along as we near the end of the semester. I thought this would be a great way to get the information to you quickly and thoroughly. So we are at the close of the Pentateuch with the book of Deuteronomy and with the Israelites reaching the edge of the Promised Land. And the next set of books that we come upon are the historical books. The first two are Joshua, and then Judges. And those are the ones I'm going to kind of fill you in on today. So, like I said, we leave the Israelites ready to enter the Promised Land. You can see the route that they took traced in red on the map here. They are right at the edge of the Jordan River. And once they cross over the Jordan, they'll be in Canaan, that land that God promised to Abraham. Moses at this point has died. He died on Mount Nebo in the land of Moab, and you can see that that's close to Canaan, but not quite at Canaan yet. It's in the top right-hand quadrant of the map. At this point, Joshua has taken over as leader. He's kind of been Moses' right-hand man all the way through, but Moses and the rest of the first generation of Israelites who complained so much and strayed from God while they were in the desert have died. So Joshua and another person named Caleb worked together to lead them finally lead them into Canaan. And Moses and the first generation are not able to go with them. The problem is Canaan is currently occupied by various peoples who are ready to defend themselves with weapons and with all sorts of fighting. And so the land that God has promised to the Israelites needs to be taken back by force. And since God is on their side, however, they are going to be able to do this, but in the historical books, there are an awful lot of battles, and that is battles that will help them to take back the Promised Land. So just a little background to give you the time frame and everything. The books of Joshua and Judges cover the historical period of the Israelites from Moses' death, which was about 1250 BC, covered in Deuteronomy chapter 34, through the beginning of the monarchy, which was about 1030 BC. These books tell how the Israelites moved into and settled the Promised Land, really conquered it, as I said. How they interacted with their Canaanite neighbors, sometimes not so well, as I mentioned, by conquering them, obviously with violence, but also sometimes the Canaanite neighbors rubbed off on them in not so great a way, and they ended up worshiping the Canaanite gods and straying from Yahweh. So we see that a little bit in the book of Joshua and the book of Judges. So just to start with Joshua, kind of makes sense. This book that's called the book of Joshua focuses on Joshua. Some themes of the book: that God is on their side, that it truly is God's will that they get back this land that he has promised to them. And that without God's help, they would never have made it. God really does help them pull off some miracles, or really does do some miracles for them through Joshua. For example, you see in the picture here, a moon and a sun kind of frozen in place with Joshua's arms extended and a battle going on in front of him. This is a story of one of the battles that they are in to take back the Promised Land. And what happens is the Israelites are fighting against an army that really needs a rest, and it's getting towards the end of the day. And when the sun sets, they'll be able to regroup and get their rest and fight back and possibly overtake the Israelites. But the Israelites are in a pretty good position currently. If the sun goes down, things will be equaled out again, and there's a chance the Israelites will lose. Well, Joshua, on behalf of the Israelites, prays to God for a solution to help them figure out how to win the battle. And God tells him, Joshua, stand with your arms extended, one towards the sun and one towards the moon. And as long as you keep your arms up, time will be frozen, basically. The sun will stand still. And so as long as Joshua's hands are extended, the sun stands still, night doesn't come, and the other army doesn't get the rest that they need. The Israelites are able to win the battle. Now, the catch is he has to hold his arms out himself. No one else can hold them up for him. but they try to kind of support him so he can lean on them and things like that. But ultimately, God really pulls this miracle off for the Israelites, this miracle of a win through Joshua. In the book of Joshua, the Israelites are finally, after 40 years, led by Joshua into the Promised Land. And a big theme in the book of Joshua, as well as in the Pentateuch, we saw it all the time in the Pentateuch, was the theme of obedience, of obeying God. In this case as well, the people obey Joshua, who is acting on God's behalf. Just some things about Joshua. He certainly was a new leader for them. They were used to following Moses. But just as they obeyed Joshua and collectively obeyed God, Joshua was a faithful man. He was obedient to God, and that was really his best feature. He did what God asked. And sort of just an interesting point of fact, the name Joshua actually means Savior. And Jesus' name is a variation of the name Joshua. Jesus means he saves. Joshua means Savior. And in fact, in the Aramaic language, which was the language that the Hebrews spoke during the time of Jesus, or that the Jews spoke, during the time of Jesus, Jesus would have been pronounced something like Yeshua. So you can see the similarities. Yeshua, Joshua, you can see the similarities between those names. So just like we said, Isaac prefigures Jesus and Joseph prefigures Jesus, it's possible that you could argue that Joshua also prefigures Jesus in some ways, especially in this piece that he's obedient to God. He's faithful, another way that he prefigures Jesus. But something else about Joshua that we have to know about is that he's well prepared. He's organized. He kind of knows what he needs to do. So he's kind of a natural leader. So how do the people respond to his leadership? Well, in Joshua 1, verse 16, we hear when Joshua is speaking to them, they answer, "We will do all that you have commanded us, and we will go wherever you send us." So they really obey Joshua, who is obeying God. And so therefore, sort of transitively, they're obeying God. Total obedience. If you want to reflect on the assistance that God provides, you can take a look at Joshua 1 through 10, and hear about the things that God promises to Joshua, what God will give to Joshua and the Israelites, the 4 things God tells Joshua to do, and what Joshua's marching orders are. He's basically just reaffirming the covenant. I'll be your God, you be my people. Just obey me, just listen to me, and I'll help you out. All right. So here's just some insight into that if you want to glance at this for a minute. All right. So in summary, because you just don't have time to read the whole book, but Joshua 1 through 12, those chapters really describe the conquest of the Promised Land, kind of battle after battle. And after they've conquered the Promised Land, what we see is that Canaan ends up being divided among the 12 tribes of Israel. People have really held on to and identified with their tribes. Remember, those 12 sons of Jacob develop into 12 tribes. And these 12 tribes settle in different areas of Canaan. So you can see in the map here the general areas in which they settle. You will note that there is no Levi, no specific territory for Levi. And that is because the Levites end up kind of following the pattern of Aaron, who is the first priest. And so the Levites end up being the priests for the Jewish people, and they're spread all over the place. And there's also no territory for Joseph. The tribe of Joseph ends up sort of being like nomads. And so they travel all over the place as well, and they don't really gain major territories. But so they just kind of are content to move about. So you see where the 12 tribes settle here. It's just important for you to know that once they get to Canaan, they do kind of settle out into their 12 tribes. And so you can see how they've done that. The book of Joshua ends with a big farewell by Joshua in chapters 23 and 24. It ends with a renewal of the covenant at Shechem, which is the place where it's done, a reminder of God's goodness, and finally Joshua's death. And before his death, Joshua reminds the Israelites to observe the law, to remain loyal to the Lord, and to remember everything God has done for them. And in fact, he actually gives them a little recap. He reminds them that he helped them be freed from the Egyptians, the slavery of the Egyptians. He reminds them that God helped them pass through the waters of the Red Sea, how God provided for them in the desert, how God has been on their side through all of these battles and helped them conquer all of these people. So these things that Joshua reminds the Israelites to do are really kind of very typical Joshua, sort of his legacy. It's how he lived, and it's how he wants them to live as well. So he's really a good leader for them and is guiding them to follow the Lord and to remain strong in the Lord. All right. So just as you don't have to memorize these or anything, but just to see how Joshua prefigures Jesus. I'm sorry. For Joshua, his name means Savior. For Jesus, his name means God saves. Joshua led his people into the promised land. Jesus leads us beyond sort of the Jordan of this life into heaven. Joshua is obedient to God's will all the time. Jesus is also obedient to God's will. Not my will, but yours be done, he says in the garden as he's contemplating his death. So we get Joshua prefiguring Jesus here. And they get to Canaan and they settle down and they live happily ever after. Not quite. Not quite. There's a little bit more after this, and so that's what we're going to talk about as well. As they've settled, these people that they've conquered, they're not so happy with them. So they still have to kind of contend with them, the people who are resisting them, and in a hostile way, people are attacking them. Since at this point, there's no strong central authority, like, for example, Moses or Joshua who has died, there's no king. God actually raises up various leaders to help lead the Israelites. They need leaders. We know that when they don't have a leader, things go wrong. For example, when Moses goes up on the mountain with God for 10 days to receive the 10 commandments, all it takes is 10 days for them to stray and worship a false god. So without a leader, these Israelites really can get lost. So God sends these people, this group of people who come to be known as judges to help them. So we're going to talk a little bit about the judges. Actually, we're going to move into talking about the judges in the next screencast because I don't think I have time to cover them in this one. So we'll see you next time in the judges screencast. Thanks.